This is apropos. Huge crowds gathered at a zoo in Tokyo earlier to bid a teary-eyed farewell to two giant pandas who are now on their way home to China. It leaves Japan without any of the beloved bears for the first time in 50 years as ties between the Asian neighbours fray. Their abrupt return was announced last month during a diplomatic spat that began when Japan's Conservative Prime Minister suggested that Tokyo could intervene militarily in the event of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. Selena Sykes has the story.
After being picked in a hugely oversubscribed lottery system and standing in line for several hours, these lucky visitors at Ueno Zoo in Tokyo got to bid farewell to Xiao and Lei, the last two giant pandas in Japan. The twins were born here in 2021, but they have now been returned to China.
I've been bringing my boy here since he was a baby, so I hope it becomes a good memory for him.
I always liked pandas. Seeing the twins and witnessing their growth, especially since they were so small, has been such a great joy.
The departure of the cuddly black and white bears is a sad moment for animal lovers in Japan, but is also symbolic of deteriorating relations between Tokyo and Beijing. After Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi said Tokyo would get involved militarily if China attacked Taiwan, and broke from the country's long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity on the issue, which kept China guessing while leaving room for economic ties to grow. Now Chinese tourism to Japan has plummeted after Beijing urged its citizens not to travel to the country. Giant pandas, native to southwestern China, are used by Beijing as a gesture of goodwill to other countries. But China retains all ownership of pandas it loans, including cubs born abroad. Japan's first two pandas arrived in 1972 to mark a normalization in diplomatic ties with China after decades of animosity. But now, for the first time since then, it is without any pandas. And that doesn't look likely to change anytime soon. Despite requests from Tokyo's government, Chinese authorities have said there are no plans to send replacements.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Kristi Govella, Senior Advisor and Japan Chair at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Kristi, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. Firstly, these pandas were due to be returned to China next month when the loan to Japan was due to expire. Do you think there's any chance that their early departure wasn't politically motivated?
I mean, given everything that's going on with China and Japan right now, it seems likely that political motivation was part of it. Tensions have been consistent, and this is a way of demonstrating some kind of penalty towards Japan without making it really high stakes in the case of China.
And the row itself, it doesn't seem to be hurting the Japanese Prime Minister. Her refusal to bend to Chinese demands to withdraw the remarks that she's made about Taiwan. It's certainly not hurting her approval rating, is it?
We haven't seen negative effects, particularly from Taiwan comments by Prime Minister Takaichi. Actually, her approval rating was as high as 73% last week before she called a snap election. It's sunk a little since then, but that's primarily due to internal politics, not due to the tensions with China. It's been really interesting how robust public approval for Prime Minister Takaichi has been, and it demonstrates a greater awareness of security issues on the part of the Japanese public and a greater concern over actions by China, Russia, North Korea, etc.
Yeah, and how important is the relationship between Japan and China for peace and stability in the wider Indo-Pacific region?
China-Japan relations are really essential. They determine a lot of the dynamics. Of course, U.S.-Japan relations are key, and Japan is a key military ally of the U.S. in the region. So in many ways, the dynamics of U.S.-China strategic competition are reflected and kind of mirrored in what we see from Japan. Obviously, the two countries have really strong trade relations, and those are continuing despite decreased tourism and other kinds of restrictions. So we haven't really seen the tensions escalate as far as they can go, or even as far as they went over a decade ago when China and Japan were last at odds. But, this relationship is really key for the region.
Yeah, because isn't it true that over the last 15 years or so, tensions have deepened between the two, even as they were maintaining those close economic ties?
It's true. So About a decade ago, there was an incident around the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands that caused an uptick in tensions. But after that eventually petered out after several years, the two countries, continued to trade. And they never really have become as close as they were before those periods of tension in the early 2010s because of perceived increasing aggressiveness by China on the part of Japan in places like the East China Sea, for example. So we've seen something that looks like increasingly tense relations despite economic interdependence.
Yeah, and has China's rise as a major power, do you think that's also worsened that kind of geopolitical rivalry? Some might say that their relationship is now essentially defined by that kind of rivalry.
The rise of China has been the greatest concern for Japan for several decades now. In some sense, you could perceive it as rivalry, but in another sense, the rise of China, particularly as it has been coupled with a more increasingly aggressive approach to military behavior, et cetera, has been something that Japan has seen as part of a deteriorating security environment around it. This has also been coupled with increasing inconsistencies and the buildup of the North Korean nuclear program, for example, as well as concerns about Russia and Russia-China cooperation. So the rise of China, unfortunately, has been coupled with a lot of these negative security trends and has come to be interpreted as an increasing threat to Japan's security environment.
And do you think that a real thaw in relations is possible when the future of Taiwan, for example, remains in question?
At the moment, it seems like Japan-China tensions are going to continue because in both countries, the fundamental reason for the disagreement hasn't changed. Prime Minister Takaichi has not withdrawn her remarks, although she's clarified that they are consistent with longstanding Japanese government policy. So in that sense, they are not as much of a departure as they are sometimes characterized to be in the news. But it's unlikely that the two sides will be able to de-escalate easily since Taiwan is a core issue for China. And because in Japan, these concerns, as I was mentioning earlier, about security have become much more pronounced. Possibly if there is a change of government in Japan, that could create an opening for a sort of reset under a new prime minister, but that remains to be seen given the results of the upcoming February 8 election in Japan.
And might that kind of reset be nudged along given the ongoing uncertainty that we're seeing over Donald Trump's trade policies and other threats in the region? Do you think that's something that might actually encourage the two sides to open communications once again? Or do you think that, as you say, that's just too far and not realistic at this particular point in time?
Despite all of the policy changes that we've seen under the second Trump administration and the frustrations and difficulties that these have caused for Japan, we have not really seen the Japanese government attempt to significantly improve relations with China. If anything, the concerns about China within Japan are prompting the Japanese government to do what it can to strengthen its relationship with the U.S. despite the vagaries of the second Trump administration. So at the moment, Japan is building relationships with a lot of other countries around the world, but when it comes to China, there are still serious concerns that prevent them from becoming closer.
And let's talk a little bit perhaps about the military purge that we saw in China over the weekend. What do you think was actually behind that? Do you think these generals, they'd perhaps become too powerful, were kind of posing too much of a threat, becoming too assertive for President Xi Jinping?
There are many theories circulating about the recent military purges in China and what this could mean. I think it's very difficult, as everyone knows, to truly understand what's going on. But it's clear that, there are conflicting priorities within the Chinese leadership and that there is something of a house cleaning going on. I think that, theories about leaders sharing nuclear secrets with the U.S. seem quite overblown. At the same time, there is still definitely some kind of trend going on that suggests that there are disagreements and divisions within the Chinese military that Xi feels the need to resolve.
Lots of rumours swirling, as you say, in Beijing about that. But how serious is all of this for Jinping and his leadership, given how he does like to portray this kind of image, this projection of stability? And who is actually surrounding him now? Like, who does he have around him that are more experienced advisors?
So in terms of the image, I think, what the message that we are seeing come out of Beijing is that this was, totally orchestrated and controlled by Xi Jinping. So in that sense, it is not a challenge to him, but is rather a series of calculated decisions he made about dismissing members of his own leadership. If we look at who's been removed, it's interesting that a lot of the top leadership that has experience dealing with Taiwan and has been more involved in operations there has been basically purged at this point. So in terms of who's around, it's going to leave a gap in leadership and potentially, in some ways, leave China less prepared for a conflict in the near future. But in terms of a larger restructuring, we still have to see how those gaps are filled.
Oh, thank you, Kristi. We'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme, though. That's Kristi Govella, Senior Advisor and Japan Chair at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you.